Josh, so first question, when you think about innovation, when you think about human-centered design, it's obviously a bit different for you in the energy sector versus, I don't know, consumer goods firm, right? So how do you think about some of those differences and some of those challenges? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, so I think we think even more about what I would call experiment design. Because if you think a little bit about like why are we so heavily regulated? Well, we provide a really critical product that can literally kill people if not handled appropriately. So safety is a big deal. And it can literally be life or death for some of our customers to provide those products. So there's a good reason why we have that regulation. And but the need for customer centricity is absolutely still there, because while we need to go to our regulator and make a case that, hey, this is a product or service that we think we want to offer our customers, and this is maybe how we want to price it. One of the first questions that a regulator or any key stakeholder will ask is, well, do customers want this? Is it in the customer's best interest? Do they care about this? And so we still need to do that experiment design in a way that puts the customer at the center.
Yeah.
Because even when we engage with stakeholder, that's going to be the first question. Like, is this something that customers actually want? And so we need to think really kind of rigorously in how we design our experiments to get that customer feedback, but also do that in a way where we continue to provide our customers a safe and reliable product that they expect from our industry. So it's non-trivial to do that. It's non-trivial to put your customer at the center. It's non-trivial to design an experiment in a way that you have a sandbox that sort of doesn't harm your core product, which has a very, very high degree of reliability. And that's really where the challenge and the fun, frankly, in our industry comes in, is how you design that experiment in a way that puts customers at the center, but also maintains a safe and reliable product.
With that in mind, is it possible to be rapid in this sector, or what does rapid look like? What does that mean for you guys?
I think expectations and context are really important when we talk about rapid. So again, if you think of our product, again, it's in some cases a life or death service. If you think of core like electricity service, right? And you think it's again a commodity that has the potential to do great harm to people. It can serve great good, but can do great harm to people. Then you need to be really careful. Safety is first and foremost. You need to be really careful there. So that doesn't mean that I think making progress in a rapid sense is absolutely achievable. If you think of deploying something in that context where you're going to deploy it at scale, I think the time by which you start an experiment for something that's going to be your core kind of like safe and reliable product, the time to which it's going to scale, I think it's going to take longer than like bits or bytes on the screen, right? That's just the nature of what we do. And I think it should be that way. But that doesn't mean you can't make progress in a rapid fashion by doing that quick MVP, by identifying the key stakeholders, by understanding the economic value proposition. All those things are things you can do even in a highly regulated industry in a rapid fashion.
What are some of the key lessons you've learned, and how have you built out this approach so it's really becoming a way of doing business?
Yeah, so I think particularly people in a similar role, in an innovation role, we have a tendency to think about the nuts and bolts of what we do. So what's the process? Like what sort of projects are you going to go after? All those things are really important. But if I've learned anything, if I've relearned anything in the last 3 years, it's all about people. That's number one. It's all about people. I mean, just can't emphasize that enough. So let's unpack that. Like, what do we mean when you say it's all about people? It's certainly all about the people you hire. Do you have the right mix of skills? Do you have the right, can you empower people in the right way? Do you have people who both understand the industry but can push the envelope? So it's a little bit of like inside and outside mix. How do you even do some of the hiring, right? Like what do you ask for in that process? What do you look for? So that's kind of key, like around the who's on the team. But then people, in terms of the relationships that you build internally, is yes, you can and should wrap appropriate process around things, appropriate strategy. People want to see that. We can talk lots about that. But ultimately, it's about relationships. Can you build that relationship of trust where it's not going to happen overnight, but that relationship of trust, particularly at the executive sponsor level, where you get access to the right people, you get visibility to the right people, you're resourced appropriately, and you have like a regular cadence where that team kind of shows up. You have that executive support where people say it's important, and that needs that can't happen overnight. That needs to happen over time. I can think of what trust actually is. It's sort of, hey, I'm going to say I'm going to do X, and then you actually do X, and then you do that again and again and again, and people start to build that trust, and then you start to demonstrate results, and that has a nice positive feedback loop. But again, all of that, if you think of, I think, what success we've had over the last couple of years, what the core consistent attribute of that is, great people are at the middle or at the center of that. And that's the thing I think, again, we can easily forget, but it's really just, it's all about people. It's all about people.
So I'd love to get into just looking a bit broader now and thinking about the market more generally. So I'm curious on your perspectives on how you feel like the energy sector is going to shift going forward now. And then what does that mean for you?
I almost feel bad a little bit for saying this because it comes off sounding like a cliche, but I really think it's true. I think we've been talking for years about artificial intelligence and machine learning related applications for energy, and it always seemed like a couple years away, and maybe it still is. But I'm very excited about AI and ML implications for the energy industry, and we've actually started to pilot a few of those applications. So, for instance, image recognition of critical infrastructure. So, where you have a drone or something else, capturing an image of critical infrastructure, oftentimes from different vantage points. Basic tagging that asset in a geospatial information system, but then critically telling us something about that asset that we wouldn't otherwise know. So that the sort of processing power associated with technology can conflate, well, this asset looks like X, and I have a database, from a machine learning standpoint, of like a million other similar assets and their performance. What does that tell us about how long that asset might adequately perform? What does that tell us about a repair and replace cycle for that asset? What does that tell about potential safety conditions? I think we're still not quite there, but I think we're on the cusp of letting utilities be far more nuanced and intelligent about how we manage and operate our assets, to the great benefit of customers. That drives cost savings around making better repair and replace cycles or decisions, and it should drive greater reliability and safety as well. The other thing that I think is a really interesting challenge in our industry is, if you look at like risk and insurance and asset related like protection models, the kind of risk and insurance industry has typically built how they price their products and how they've understood risk in a backward looking fashion, right? So like, let's take 40, 50 years of historical data. Let's crunch a bunch of numbers around that. Let's like build an algorithm around that. Boom, I spit out like a kind of a price or a risk or an asset model around that. What's really maybe both scary but also very interesting is, because the climate is changing so rapidly, that backwards looking view on performance and weather data and all that sort of stuff is becoming less and less relevant. I'm not going to say it's irrelevant. I think there is some value for that. But how do we adjust to a world where the backwards looking models don't really make that much sense anymore, aren't as relevant as they used to be, where the pace of change, particularly from a climate standpoint, is far more rapid, and there's all this intersection between relevant trends. So for instance, like we're talking about drought and wildfire on the West Coast, Well, here in southwestern Pennsylvania, where we are, all the climate models say we're going to have far more precipitation. So that has a very different set of impacts to our business. But I think the bigger picture thing, which is really maybe a little bit scary, but also really exciting and interesting, is again, how do we make decisions about assets that are going to, in some cases, and investments that are going to have maybe 100-year life, where we can't look backwards on backwards looking performance in the way that we did before? How do we build that into future predictive models where the future, especially because of the climate drivers, are going to look so different than what came before? That's a really big and interesting challenge, and a really, really important one.
So how does your utility work across the ecosystem? Because these don't seem like problems you could just figure out on your own.
Yeah, that ecosystem engagement is so critical. Finding the right avenues to engage with innovators and startups is so critical. And I think for us at Duquesne Light, we're, generously, I refer to us generously as a medium-sized utility. So we can't have a whole bunch of people out there scouting every day and looking into startups. So that's where we lean on our personal networks. That really matters a lot. But also we lean on who are the right entities that can help us screen and aggregate some of that innovation, where where we don't have to necessarily talk to all 10 startups in that space. They can help us find 1, 2, or 3 that are relevant to our use cases. The other way we get a lot of leverage in terms of how we engage with our ecosystem is, and this is something I think that's historically very foreign to utilities, is tell people what our challenges and our problems are. That sounds so obvious, but I think in part because we're heavily regulated, we do not have a kind of an industry history of doing that maybe as openly and transparently as we would like. We've seen a lot of benefit of defining our problem statements, defining our problems and challenges, and then throwing it open to the world in a way that all the different innovators and other people in the ecosystem can engage and help us with that challenge. So we the most recent instance that we had for this was we're running an open innovation challenge on better ways to monitor and manage our underground electric cable. And we're doing that in concert with a couple other major utilities who joined our effort, which is great, including Exelon, which is one of the major utilities in the country. And it's the thing, we've gotten a lot of really great technology out of it, and that's obviously extremely valuable. But I think just the practice of getting comfortable talking about what problem statement we're trying to solve, throwing it open to quite literally the world in a very public fashion, and seeing what comes out of it might be sort of, our innovation colleagues at like consumer packaged goods companies might hand wave a little bit at that, but for our industry, I think it's a new paradigm, and it's been successful thus far. And I think especially again as a medium-sized utility, we have to do that because we just don't have the resources to go out there and meet every startup. So we've got to find ways where we have leverage by finding the right people who can help us screen, and then just being really thoughtful and strategic about how we define those problems and throwing it open to the world. So
how do you think about working with some of those big tech firms? And I mean, you mentioned some of the smaller businesses as well. So how do you think about incorporating some of these tech firms into the innovation process more formally? And then, how do you get the benefit of working with some of these bigger firms?
The first thing I'd say is it's great that it's wonderful in our industry, climate and the challenges associated with that are motivating a whole range of really talented people to enter our industry, and sort of new players to the energy industry to enter our industry. They see it's a huge market. They see it's a big challenge. It's one of the most important challenges of our lifetime. And you see a lot of people enter, and that's great. That talent, that new blood, that fresh way of looking things is fantastic. What sometimes leaves me a little nervous about some of these new players is there is a little bit of a Silicon Valley ethos of like, well, just move fast and break things. When if you think about the customer experience, what a customer wants from their utility, they want a safe, reliable product. That's not the only thing they want. That's why we need to innovate. But that's certainly at the core of innovation, and that'll never really go away. And I think sometimes for newer folks entering our industry, there isn't always a sufficient appreciation for the danger of the commodity that we transmit and distribute, and a really strong desire around safety and reliability and what that means for what we can and can't do, at least initially around innovation. So we've got to toe this hopefully healthy fine line where we need to be really open to those fresh ideas, that fresh talent, those kind of fresh people. And we don't need to put them in the same kind of constrained box that maybe our industry has operated in for a while. But we also at least need to make folks aware of the inherent constraints, inherent kind of customer expectations around, again, safety and reliability. And what can we do within those kind of overlapping Venn diagrams, the new blood, the new ideas, the new talent, with the constraints that are sort of inherent to our industry. I think there's a lot of great overlap there, and that's where I see our role as a utility of like defining that overlap and trying to get people to play in the middle of that, where we get that fresh blood, we get that fresh ideas, but we're also making sure we're continuing to have a safe and reliable and affordable product.
Looking ahead, how do you see your innovation capability and the way you approach innovation pivoting and changing?
The need for innovation is just going to grow, and specifically, I think what people don't always realize, and people inside our industry don't always realize, is that even for customers to get the same level of performance from the core product that they've always seen, so the same level of reliability, a similar level of like kind of inflation-adjusted affordability, even to stay there, we need to innovate. So forget doing anything new. But it's what's the famous saying? It's like the Alice in Wonderland, the Red Queen effect. Like, to stay in the same place, you need to move faster. Well, we don't want to stay in the same place. We want to like move ahead. But even if the ambition was just about staying in the same place, even then we still need to innovate, because for instance, I think it's we've had more extreme weather events, and I want to say in the last 4 years than I think something like the 18 or 19 years prior. And so again, just to provide customers the same level of reliability and affordability that they expect, we need to innovate. And then when you think of reinventing the business model, providing customers the new product and services that they expect, providing them the same level of kind of customer service that they have come to expect from other customer brands that they're familiar with, the Amazons of the world, like then the bar raises even higher. So I think the industry is only beginning to understand and appreciate the degree of both challenges that are in front of us, but also opportunities. And it's going to be a really interesting decade. I'm looking forward to seeing what happens. So
it's exciting.